these were given with the 16-bit system in mind. That is the half precision system. So those questions actually followed the 16-bit question. So I think you should have understood that that relates to the second one, not the first one, which is a hypothetical 7-bit system.
ওটাই ভেবেছিলাম স্যার, কিন্তু মানে বললো ফোন করেছিল আপনাকে, তাই স্যার আর কোশ্চেন করিনি।
হ্যাঁ স্যার, মানে আমি ওটা মেনশনও করেছিলাম যে আপনি হাইপোথেটিক্যালের জন্য বলছেন কিনা। তো
actually I was not in front of my system. I did not
হ্যাঁ স্যার,
remember
এটা একটু
the statement of the problem. So if you had said either 16-bit or 7-bit, that would have been easier. But to me, I somehow thought that you were talking about the second one itself, means the half precision. So anyway, while checking the paper, I will keep that in mind. So you can expect to receive some grace marks on that question itself. However, for the first part, that is section 1, I have got the answer. You can say the model answer. I can show that to you. Share the screen. Tell me if you can see it.
Yes sir.
Visible?
Yes sir.
Yes sir.
Okay. So these are all the preliminary things. Wait. So these are the questions. So that was more or less around 16 people got it right. This one also 16 people got that right. So some of you have selected the other options as well, but those are not correct. This one actually most of you got wrong. I don't know whether you got confused by this. All of the given options in most cases, but approximate error is not the true value minus approximate value. If the true value is known, then it's going to give you a true error. Even if this second one says approximate value, but we are actually getting this error with respect to the true value, the exact value. Hence, this is a definition of a true error. So all of the given options cannot be the acceptable answer here. Both these two are approximate error, and only a few of you have got this right. The other questions are more or less fine. These are straightforward questions, quite easy to get the answer, and I don't think there is any problem regarding these questions. Yeah, one more thing is that in the last question, Newton-Raphson method, that function that just touches the x-axis, that is a drawback of the bisection method, not the Newton-Raphson method. Here, some of you have got that wrong. Okay. So this is regarding the section 1. I think all of you are, if you go through the previous notes or the presentations in just a little bit of detail, you can get the answers to these questions by yourself. So that is all regarding the answers to section 1 of the test. Do you have any other questions regarding the test, or anything to ask from there? Okay, so the second test will be in the last week of the session. That means around mid-December. So fix a date and time and let me know. But in the second test, you would be expected to do some programming. So that is not going to be entirely multiple choice questions. So some sort of programming questions will also be present there. So prepare well for that. And the next class also will be a class where I will demonstrate some programs related to the simultaneous linear equations. So that class you should attend to have some ideas about how to do programming. Okay, so if there are no more questions, I think we can start the class today, for today. Let me just start the recording. Hello and welcome to today's numerical analysis class. Interruption. Sorry about that. Here we will continue our discussions on system of simultaneous linear equations, or rather solution techniques of simultaneous linear equations. In the last class, these system of linear simultaneous equations have been introduced in detail, and we have also discussed about certain solution techniques for these sort of equation systems at a length. Techniques were the direct methods. You probably remember that there are two types of generalized techniques for achieving solutions for linear simultaneous equations. One of them, one class of such solution technique, direct methods. And under direct methods, we have the elimination techniques such as the Gaussian elimination and Gauss-Jordan elimination. Both of them have been discussed in the last class. Today, however, our focus shifts to the iterative methods, which are dependent on successive approximation procedure. Now, on this slide, you can see the representation of a generalized n cross n system, that is a system of linear equations having n unknowns in n equations. The unknowns are the xi's, where I varies from 1 to n, whereas the coefficients of these unknowns are represented by aij's, where both I and j vary from 1 to n. So our main objective here would be to obtain the solution to these equations, that system of equations. That means finding out values of the unknowns x1, x2 going up to xn. But today we will be doing that with the help of certain iterative methods. We have come across such iterative methods previously as well, while we were discussing about solution of nonlinear equations. So although these methods will not be exactly similar to them, but the fundamental principle of iterative methods will of course be valid here as well. So that means here in these iterative methods, we will start with an approximate guess, an approximate value for the unknowns x1, x2 going up to xn, and with each iteration we will try to modify those approximate guesses and approach the exact solution, the true solution of the system of equations. Now, how do we go from one to the other? That means from one approximate guess to the next approximate guess. That is basically dependent on certain logic. And that is what we will be discussing in much more details just a little bit later. But first of all, we have to see why these iterative methods are necessary. On one hand, we have already seen the direct methods. Direct methods are present there, and direct methods usually give us exact solutions. So if there is a technique available to us that provides us with exact solutions, analytical solutions, then what is the need for having these another set or another class of approximate methods? Obviously, these iterative methods are not going to provide you with the exact answer. By nature, iterative methods are approximate. So that means whatever answer they provide, that will be associated with certain amount of error. But obviously, those errors can be controlled by the nature of the problem themselves. So the answer to that question, why do we need the iterative methods, actually lies in the disadvantages of the Gaussian elimination technique, or more generally, the elimination techniques, that is, the direct methods. These methods, as we have discussed in the last class, are prone to large round of errors. And they become quite a bit of a problem when the number of equations in this set are higher. As you go on increasing the number of equations in this set of linear simultaneous equations, the problem of round of errors actually increases. So that undermines the applicability of the direct methods. On the other hand, if you have an approximate method or iterative method which is approximate in nature, it actually provides a better control over the amount of round of error in the solution. How does it do so? I would ask you to think back to the nonlinear solution techniques we discussed for, say, Newton-Raphson method or bisection method. There, we had a predefined error limit, let's say epsilon t. So this predefined error limit or tolerance on error was provided at the start of the iterations. And at the end of each iteration, we had calculated an approximate error epsilon a and compared it with the predefined error limit epsilon t. Only when this epsilon a falls below this epsilon t, then we say that the convergence is achieved and solution is obtained. So that means we have a pretty good control over how much error would be present in the final solution. That is not the case for the direct methods. And this is the advantage of the iterative methods. So this is why in certain situations, we can use iterative methods over direct methods. But what is the domain of applicability? When we use direct methods, when do we use iterative methods? I just now mentioned that if the system of equations have a large number of equations, then the round of error becomes a problem for the elimination techniques. So obviously, when you have small dimension systems, that means n is say 2, 3, or 4, small number of equations in the set are present, then we can use the direct elimination techniques without any problem. Whereas if the number of equations are large in a set, then we can go for iterative methods. You will find that iterative methods are very seldom used for solving systems of small dimension, because you have to consider the time taken to obtain the solution as well. And in these cases, the time required for obtaining the sufficient accuracy exceeds that required for direct techniques. So here, for small dimension systems with n, where n is small, we can use direct methods. For large systems, we can use iterative methods, especially when there are high percentage of zero entries in the coefficient matrix, the iterative techniques are very much efficient, both in terms of the computer storage and the computation itself. So there is a clear demarcation between where direct techniques are useful and where iterative methods are useful. Both of these set of techniques, both these classes have their own strong points, own advantages, as well as disadvantages. And depending on that, you have to judiciously choose where to apply the direct elimination techniques such as Gaussian elimination and Gauss-Jordan elimination, and where to apply iterative methods. Some iterative methods that we will discuss, in fact, there are two of them. One is Jacobi method, the other one is Gauss-Seidel method. We will come to that later. Now, practically, where do such systems occur? That means large percentage of zero entries in the coefficient matrix. They frequently occur in circuit analysis. That is the domain of electrical engineering. But more generally speaking, in the numerical solution of certain boundary value problems and partial differential equations, when those system of equations, partial differential equations, are discretized and taken down to a set of algebraic equations, a set of linear simultaneous equations, we often find that there are large number of zero entries in the coefficient matrix. So in real life problems as well, these sort of situations often arise. So in case of iterative methods, what is the first thing to do? The obvious thing is to select an initial guess. Initial guesses are needed in case of iterative methods. That is where you start your iterations. That is the starting guess. And a judicious choice leads to faster convergence. Again, I would draw your attention back to the discussion of solution of nonlinear equations. Remember there, depending on the choice of the initial guess, let's say for Newton-Raphson method, you could have non-convergence as well. So if the initial guess is not appropriate, not proper, the solution goes astray and convergence may not be achieved. So you have to be very careful about choosing the initial guess in case of iterative methods to solve simultaneous linear equations as well. And what it involves? After the choice of a proper initial guess, in fact, here you would have a set of initial values. Why? Because we are here actually solving for n number of unknown variables. We start with x1, go up to xn. So for all of this, for this particular set, x1 to xn, you need to find the solution. So for all these unknown variables, starting with x1, ending with xn, you need to choose initial values. So you have to get an appropriate set of initial values. Once you get that, then you use some logic, certain systematic method to refine the estimates and approach the solution, true solution or exact solution from iteration to iteration. So basically, we can state our objective as this. We need to find an iterative technique to solve a n cross n linear system represented by Ax equal to b, which starts with an initial approximation x0 to the solution x and generates a sequence that converges to x. So that is, in short, the description of the iterative method that we are looking for. That is the general description. We have a n cross n linear system, which is represented by Ax into b. We start with an initial guess of x0 and generate a sequence that converges to x. So here, this n cross n linear system is represented as shown here. This is quite familiar to us by now. We have n number of equations starting with this going up to n. We also have n number of unknown variables, x1, x2, x3 going up to xn. We have the constants on the right hand side, and that represents an n cross n linear system with n linear equations in n unknowns. How can we write it as Ax equal to B? We can represent it in the matrix form, just like this. This is the matrix form of the system of linear equations. This matrix is A, that you can call the coefficient matrix. This is the vector of unknown variables. You can represent it as x. And this is the right hand side vector, constants. So that is why this can be written as Ax equal to and the starting guess or initial guess is represented as x0 like this. So it contains elements such as this. So x1 0, x2 0, like that going up to xn 0. So that is the vector of approximate starting guesses. So this is what it looks like. As I already mentioned, two common iterative methods are Jacobi method and Gauss-Seidel method, and these are the two that we will discuss in detail in today's class. However, at this point, I should also make it known that these iterative methods can only be applied if we have non-zero diagonal coefficients. That means aii, where I varies from 1 to n, these elements, these aii's, should not be equal to 0. So the diagonal term in this matrix, this A11, A22, going up to ANN, these should be non-zero. So this term, this term, this term. So all the terms present in the diagonal of this matrix, this coefficient matrix, should not be equal to 0. Why is that? That will become evidently clear as we discuss about the details of these iterative methods. Let us now move forward to that. We'll first of all discuss the iterative methods or principles applied on this 3x3 system because it is easier to understand. So for illustration purpose, let us consider 3 simultaneous equations in 3 unknowns. So that is what has been shown here. We have 3 unknowns, x1, x2, and x3. And with these 3 unknowns, we have made up 3 equations. This is the first one, second one, and third one. So it's a 3x3 system. Now, the first step here is to express the unknowns in terms of certain expression. You take the first equation, and from that first equation, you generate an expression for x1. Similarly, from the second equation, you get an expression for x2, and the third equation gives you an expression for x3. And in these expressions, you can see that the diagonal terms actually appear in the denominator. A11 here, A22 here, A33 here. Now it becomes clear why that condition was applied, that the diagonal terms must be non-zero to apply the iterative methods. If these non-diagonal coefficients A11, A22, A33, any one of them becomes 0, then you have a problem of division by 0 and will not be applicable. So when the coefficients of the diagonal term of the system are non-zero, you can write the three equations, because it's a 3x3 system, as shown here. So what we have done, it's very simple. We have kept the A11 x1 term on the left hand side. We have taken everything else. That means we have taken these two terms on the right hand side. So that becomes B1 minus A12 x2 minus A13 x3. And then we have divided the entire thing by the diagonal term A11, coefficient of the diagonal term A11. So that's how we obtain x1, that's how we obtain x2 and x3. So once that is done, next we have to consider the initial guesses. We considered the initial guess to the true solution to be x10, x20, and x30. We can write it like this. Those are the initial guesses. At this point, we can substitute x20 in the first equation like this and x30 here. In doing so, we can calculate a new value of x1, which is written as x11, because it is the next value of x. We started with x10, we end up at x11 by using the values of the other initial guesses for the other two unknowns. So that is done. When that is done, we go to the next equation. We plug in x10 in place of x1 and x30 in place of x3 in the second equation. And quite easily, we can find x21. We continue forward, substitute x10 and x20 in the third equation, find a new value of x3, which is written as x31. So that ends the first iteration. At the end of the first iteration, you have a new set of guesses, x11, x21, and x31. Now you repeat the procedure with the new guess. So that is the complete essence of the iterative method. These new values of the unknowns will again be substituted in the corresponding expressions, those three expressions that I have already shown, and we obtain another set of values after the second iteration. So at the end of the second iteration, you have arrived at x12, x22, x32. And hopefully, like this, you will be approaching the true solution or the exact solution. So the entire process is then repeated until the solution converges close enough to the true values. So how can we write this iteration sequence? We can write it with the help of certain superscripts. So I can write x1 k1 is equal to 1 by A11 multiplied by B1 minus A12 x2k minus A13 x3k. And similarly, the other expressions can also be modified as shown here. So notice this use of subscript. So here I have used x2k, x3k, x1k, and so on. So what are these? These are the values of the unknown variables at the end of kth iteration. You can make a comparison with what we had shown over here after the first iteration and after the second iteration. So considering these superscripts makes it easier for us to understand at which iteration we are. The values of the unknowns are obtained after how many number of iterations. And using the values of the kth iteration for these unknowns, we obtain the value for the k plus 1th iteration. That means the next iteration. You can check this out. Put k is equal to 0. So you have b1 minus a12 x20 minus a13 x30. And what would be the next iteration? Here put k equal to 0. So x1, 1. So x1, 1 is obtained by the use of the values x20 and x30, which is exactly what we have seen in the previous slide. Put k equal to 1, you find that this will become x12 on the left hand side. So x12 is right over here. So you are obtaining this value. And on the right hand side, you have x21 because k is equal to 1 now. So you will have x21 here and x31 here. And that is what we have used in the expression right here. So this is nothing but the iteration sequence written considering the number of iterations which has gone by and where we are at the moment exactly. So the iteration sequence is taken into account. Now, obviously, the next question would be, where do we stop? That means, what is the termination criteria? Qualitatively, we can say that when the absolute relative approximate error for each of the unknowns, that is x1, x2, x3 in this case, is less than the pre-specified tolerance, we can stop the iterations. This is basically the Jacobi method for 3 equations. So what we have done, just to recap quickly, we have a 3x3 system, 3 equations, 3 unknowns. We have expressed the unknowns in terms of the other unknowns using these equations. So x1 is expressed as an expression, x2 also, and x3 also. So we have these expressions. In these expressions, we will put in the initial guesses, first of all, and calculate a new set of values for the unknowns. Those new set of values will then become the guesses, starting guesses for the next iteration. And like that, we will repeat the process until and unless all of the absolute relative approximate error falls below a pre-specified tolerance, an error limit. So that is basically what Jacobi method is. So we can now convert this general procedure to take into account n linear equations in n unknowns. We can express the unknowns x1, x2 like this. These are the expressions, nothing difficult. for the first expression, first equation, you take the first unknown, take everything else apart from the first unknown term to the right hand side, divide it with the coefficient of the first unknown, and you get the required expression. That can be done for all the n number of equations to get n expressions for the n unknowns, starting with x1, ending with xn. You have to consider the initial guess, x1 0, x2 0, going up to xn 0. Substitute those initial guesses into the expressions that you have derived and repeat the process till you have minimized the error sufficiently. Now, those expressions for the unknowns can also be written in short form using this summation sign. So this is basically what we have here. That's the same thing. So these are the expressions for x1, x2 going up to xn. Here the same expressions are written. Only thing different is that we have used this summation notation over here, this notation. And that is also pretty easy to understand. If we again go back to the previous one, we have put them inside this bracket, let's say. So this negative sign is outside, so all of these become plus. So we have a plus sign here, plus sign here. So what is this? This is basically summation A1, all of these are A1. So A1j, where j varies from 2 to n, multiplied by xj. So this is representing the term within the curly braces. So you can check over here that that is what has been written. Summation A1j xj. Similarly, for the next term also, we can do this. So we take this bracket. These all become plus. And this can be written as summation A2j xj. But here, j varies from 1 to n, but x2 is missing because that is what we are keeping on the left hand side. So you cannot put that on the right hand side. So we have to write j not equal to 2. So we start with j equal to 1, skip the term with j equal to 2, go up to j equal to n. So that is why this is A21 x1, then directly it goes to A23 x3. x2 is missing over here. The same can be done for the first expression as well. We can say that we have started with j equal to 1. Okay, let me just keep it as 2 and write it fresh over here. So we have started, let's say, with j equal to 1 going up to n, but we do not consider the term where j is equal to 1. So A1j multiplied by xj. So that is how we have arrived at this summation expression. We can generalize this, consider the iteration sequence, and you can see that this is the same expression. We have j varying from 1 to n, A1j xj, j not equal to 1. For the second equation, second expression, j not equal to 2 with j varying from 1 to n. You have A2j xj. So that is the summation term and how we have arrived at that summation term. So I hope that is clear to you. Now the next thing to consider is that we have n number of equations here. number of equations or expressions is n. x1, x2 going up to xn. And in the first expression, this is 1, this is 1, 1, this is also 1, this is also 1. In the second expression, you see the corresponding terms, they are 2, this is A22, this is B2, this is 2. So we can further shorten this and write the entire set of n expressions in a single go. How can we do that? We can write simply xi. That would be equal to 1 by aii. Within bracket, you have bi minus summation j not equal to I, j going from 1 to n, aij xj. So simply we have replaced these numbers with I. And we can say that I and j both vary from 1 to n. So if you now put I equal to 1, you will see that you will get this expression. If you put I equal to 2, you will get the second expression. And if you put I equal to n, you will get the last expression. So in fact, this set of n expressions can be concisely written in this form. And that is what we have shown here. Obviously, we have to incorporate the superscripts as well in order to keep the iteration sequence in mind. This does not only help us write it in a concise form, it is also helpful when you are going to write the program algorithm. In order to convert it to code, you have to write the algorithm. So this provides us with the requisite help that is required to get that algorithm done. This also helps us in having a very clear idea about how many number of loops we need to use for that implementation of the program, and what would be the starting and ending points of those loops. So the indices should vary from which value to which value. That can also be found out from this expression. You have a clear idea about that. So that gives us the different expressions for the unknowns. Another thing which is very important is the termination criteria. Now, which can be written like this, that is epsilon ai, which is the relative approximate error in percentage, and that can be obtained as xik plus 1, that is the current value, minus xik, the previous value, divided by xik plus 1, which is the current value. So this is the relative error, and we have to consider the absolute value of it, that is the magnitude of the error we will consider. And that has to be less than a particular predefined tolerance, which is written as epsilon s over here. So let us now go to writing the algorithm. At the beginning, quite obviously, you will have to take input. There is not much to discuss over here. You have to take the input for all the coefficients, that is aij's, and you will require a nested for loop where two for loops would be present. One having the index of I, the other one having an index of j. And both of them will vary from 1 to n. So that you can take input of n cross n number of coefficients. We are considering n cross n system. So we have to take all the coefficients as user input. So starting with A11 going up to ANN, all those n cross n values need to be input with the help of these two for loops. Similarly, the right hand side vector also needs to be populated. So that is taken in the second line over here. So you have a for loop where I varies from 1 to n, and for each running of this for loop, each step of the for loop, you take one input for the right hand side constant value. So that is in terms of the equation system. When you have completed the first two steps, you have taken the input for the system of linear simultaneous equations. But there are other inputs that are also required. That would be the error limit and maximum number of iterations. Those are read as two variables: EPS, that stores the value of the predefined error limit, and max ITR, or max iteration, stores the maximum number of iterations permitted. So those are also input parameters. So we can say that this entire thing is basically the input part. Next, the initial guess. We have n number of unknowns. Hence, we again consider a for loop varying from 1 to n, and within this variable, we store zeros. 0 here is considered as the initial guess. I could have taken any other value as well. Could have been 1 or 1.5 or 2 or -1. Anything is possible. But for simplicity, I have just put it as 0. So this is the initial guess, the first approximation. Now we come to the heart of the expressions. Here at the top, you can see with respect to which we will implement this algorithm. That is the same expression that we discussed in the last slide. The first question again to be answered is how many number of loops are required here. The first loop that we have here, that controls the number of iterations. So first loop is for number of iterations. It is very, very important in case of iterative methods to consider a maximum number of iterations. You can write it as, let's say, n max, and this value in this program has been stored in the variable max ITR. Why is this important? That is because at the end of the maximum number of iterations, this for loop is going to end. As a result of it, you do not have a problem of an infinitely running program. So the problem of infinite loop is avoided by using this for loop over here. Sometimes these sort of programs for iterative methods, I'm talking about not the Jacobi method specifically, iterative methods in general, they should have this kind of safety exit. That is where you have provided a maximum number of iterations, after which it is going to automatically end. Sometimes it is quite possible to encode these iterative methods using while loops as well. But there, if those that while loop is not written carefully, that might give rise to a case of infinitely running code. So a problem of infinite loop may arise. So you have to be careful about that. And my suggestion is always try to write the loops for the iterative methods using for loop. In that way, you can be certain that after a certain number of steps, it is going to get over. So the first loop here controls the number of iterations. And here we have defined a variable, declared a variable max error. It controls the maximum error. And we have initialized the value of max error to 0. What is the utility of that? We'll come to it later. Now the next for loop, which varies from 1 to n. What does it control? It controls the unknowns. We have to calculate n number of unknowns. So for each running of this loop, we take care of one of these unknowns. So when I is equal to 1, we are actually operating on x1. We are finding out approximate values of x1. When I is equal to 2, we are at x2. When I is equal to n, we are calculating approximate values for xn. So like that, the particular unknown is identified by this for loop, the second for loop. Inside this, we have another variable sum, which is initialized to 0. For each of these unknowns, x1, x2, xn, we have to calculate a summation. And for calculating that summation, we have taken this variable sum and initialized it to 0. Now you see that when the step for I equal to 1 is over and it comes back to the beginning of the for loop with when it starts the for loop with I equal to 2, it will again put the value of sum back to 0. That is because you have to calculate individually all the summations. If you have kept the summation value of the previous one, then it gets added on and you get a wrong result. So it's trivial, but you have to put this here. If you put sum equal to 0 somewhere outside of this for loop, let's say at the initialization step somewhere here, then your program is going to go wrong because the summation would not be calculated properly. So it cannot be done outside of the loop. It has to be here at this step. Then comes the innermost loop, and that is where the actual summation is carried out. Now here, j varies from 1 to n. You just have to look at the limits of this summation sign over here to get the variation for j. It varies from 1 to n in steps of 1. But when you do the summation, you have to take this condition also into account. You only add the values when j is not equal to I. If j is equal to I, you need to skip that particular addition. So that is what is ensured by this if statement. Add this up only when j is not equal to I. And the statement is sum is equal to sum plus aij multiplied by x ki. So once this summation is done, you end the first for loop, go outside, then calculate this expression. You have the sum over here. So bi minus the sum, bi minus the sum, whole divided by AII. So that would be the value of xk plus 1 at the step I. Now you have to calculate the error. The error expression you can see over here, although it is slightly overwritten by this, but I think you can make it out that this is xk plus 1 minus xk divided by xk plus 1. So in the next step over here, we have calculated the error. This should, I think, be written. That is the summation. Also, I should mention over here that the third loop is for summation over J. So that is the relative error that we have calculated. What happens in the next step? We compare this relative error to the max error that we considered at the beginning. This is the max error. That is what we have compared the relative error against. And if we find that the relative error is greater than the maximum error, then we store it in the max error itself. Presumably at the first step, the relative error is always going to be higher than the max error, because max error value is 0 and you have considered some absolute value for this relative error. So it's going to be some definite positive value. So that will replace the max error term over here. From the next step onwards, you compare the relative error for that particular variable against the max error. And if it comes out to be larger, you replace the max error. If it comes to be smaller, then you retain the max error. So at the end of n steps, you will have the maximum error that is present in all the unknowns. Out of x1, x2, x3, xn, which one has the maximum amount of relative error that is found out in this step? Then you end this loop and then you go for the error checking. If this max error, that means the maximum error out of all the n unknowns, comes out to be less than EPS, that is the tolerance limit, then you say that convergence has been achieved and you print out the values of all the variables. However, if it is not less than the EPS value, the tolerance value, then you store the xkp1 inside xk and go back to the initial stage. That means you will go back over to the next iteration. So you will go back somewhere around here. And finally, you have to end the maximum iteration. That is the maximum iteration for loop. So this is how this algorithm is carried out. Any questions here?
No, sir.
Is it understood?
Sir.
You got it? Okay, fine. So we'll continue. Your task would be to develop a working program implementing this algorithm. So I want you to practice it, write a program that implements this algorithm. And probably in the next class also, I will see what you have done, what task you have done, and I also demonstrate a way to do these kind of programs also. Now, we have to consider the convergence of the iterative method as well. It's a very important thing in case of these iterative methods. Here at this step, we have compared maximum error against the pre-specified tolerance. And if this pre-specified tolerance comes out to be larger, this maximum error becomes less than the pre-specified tolerance, then we say that convergence has been achieved. Suppose it does not become less than EPS for, say, the number of iterations that you have specified. So that means convergence is not achieved. So what gives us the guarantee that within a certain number of iterations, this convergence will be achieved? In fact, there is no guarantee to that at all. The fundamental problem, two fundamental problems related to the iterative methods are non-convergence. That means it may or may not converge. You may have given 1,000 number of maximum number of iterations, but after that 1,000 number of iterations, you see that the solution has not converged at all. That means maximum error is still more than the pre-specified error. So that is a problem of non-convergence. And the second problem is that slow convergence. That means it converges, but it does so very slowly. It approaches the solution, exact solution, true solution, but it does so slowly. So these are the two problems with iterative method, and you have to keep these in mind. However, there is a certain class of linear equations that has a guarantee of convergence. These solutions to a certain class of simultaneous equations always converges. So what is the condition? The condition for convergence is written like this. So AII, that is the coefficient of the diagonal term, is greater than or equal to summation of all the other terms in that row. So you can see summation j varies from 1 to n with skipping the term j equal to I. So all the terms are summed up, and if that summation is less than or equal to the diagonal term, not only that, if one of the values in one of the rows, that diagonal term is indeed greater than the summation of all the terms, then we have guaranteed convergence. So I'll repeat again. AII greater than equal to the summation of AIJs, that means all the other terms present for all i's, and for at least one of the rows, the diagonal term has to be greater than the summation of all the other terms. This is known as a diagonally dominant system. And if this condition, these two conditions are satisfied, then convergence is guaranteed. Let's take this example. You have a coefficient matrix over here on the right hand side. So let us see if this is diagonally dominant or not. So what do we have to consider? We have to consider the diagonal element, of course. So the diagonal element for the first row is 3. Summation of the other two elements, this is -2, but consider that we are only taking into account the magnitude. So this is 2 plus 1. So we have 3, which is equal to the diagonal term. Let's go to the next row. The diagonal term is -3. So we take the magnitude of that. We have 3 over here. What about the summation of the other terms? You have 1 plus 2, that is equal to 3. So that is also equal. Now we come to the third row. Till now, the first condition has been satisfied for both the rows. We have not had the second condition satisfied as yet. But here you see that the diagonal term is 4. So let's write it over here. This is 1 because we only consider the magnitude. This is 2. That comes out to be 3. So 3 is less than 4. So it is indeed a diagonally dominant system. However, this criteria is sufficient but not necessary, which means that systems which are not diagonally dominant, they may also converge, but it is not guaranteed. So it may or may not converge if it is not diagonally dominant. However, if it is diagonally dominant, then it is guaranteed to converge. So that is the meaning of the statement over here, this statement. If a system is not diagonally dominant, it may or may not converge. However, if it is diagonally dominant, it is guaranteed to converge. So keep that in mind. Fortunately, many physical systems result in simultaneous linear equations which have diagonally dominant coefficient matrix. And as a result, they have assured convergence. So that ends the discussion regarding the Jacobi method. Now we move on to the Gauss-Seidel method, which is very similar to the Jacobi method with a slight modification. It improves its rate of convergence. Of course, if it is a diagonally dominant system. As already mentioned, slight modification to the Jacobi method to improve the rate of convergence is done here. So what is this modification? As each new value of an unknown is evaluated, it is then immediately used in the next equation to determine the next guess. Now, what does that mean? It has the effect of considering the best available estimates at all points of the iteration. So if the solution is converging, the best available guesses are always employed to calculate the next approximation. Let's consider the same system again. So we have a 3x3 system with 3 unknowns, x1, x2, x3, and 3 equations. We have got the expressions for x1, x2, and x3 from those 3 equations. And we have considered an initial guess of x10, x20, and x30. The first step is exactly similar to what happens in Jacobi method. That means we put in x2 in place of the x20 in place of x2 in the first expression, x30 in place of x3 in the first expression, and find out a value of x1. Now in this second expression, there is a change. At this point, we have already got a value for x1 over here, right? This is already calculated. So why not use this value in the second expression? Just a moment. I have an incoming call, so I'll have to take that. Sorry for the interruption. Sorry about the interruption. There was an incoming call that I had to take. So let us now continue. So as I was saying that here we have got a value of x1 obtained from the first equation. So why not use that improved value of x1 in the second equation itself? So that value is substituted in the second expression. So here is the modification from the Jacobi method. In Jacobi method, we use the initial guess in the second equation also. But in the Gauss-Seidel method, we use the improved guess in the second equation. But for x3, we have not yet obtained the improved value. So we have no other option but to go for the initial guess to calculate the value of x2. Now at this stage, we have got two improved values, x11 and x21. And in the final expression, on the right hand side, we can see that we have x1 and x2. So now we can simply substitute these two improved values in place of x1 and x2 and get a value of x3. So I hope the modification from the Jacobi method to the Gauss-Seidel method is clear to you. Here we always use the improved value of the guess if it is available to us. And that is how we obtain the values for x1, x2, x3 after the first iteration. And it definitely helps in the convergence of the problem. So the iteration sequence can now be written like this. The first equation is unchanged. You can see here it is x1k plus 1 on the left hand side. Here you have x2k and x3k. But have a look at the second expression. In the second expression, you have x2k plus 1. But here, instead of x1k, we have written x1k plus 1. So this is the modification. We use the improved value of x1 in the next expression. x3 as yet is not improved, so x3k is written over here. But in the last expression, both x1 and x2 are available to us. The improved values are available. So we write x1k plus 1 and this is x2k plus 1. The termination criteria remains exactly same as before. The absolute relative approximate error for each of the unknowns need to be calculated. And when the maximum of those becomes less than the pre-specified tolerance, then we say that convergence is achieved and we terminate the iterations. Now, one point here is that we only consider or compare the maximum relative error. The other errors are obviously less than that, and by virtue of that, they are going to be always less than the epsilon PS or EPS, that is the pre-specified tolerance value. Here we can convert the Gauss-Seidel method into a generalized form, which considers n linear equations in n unknowns. And you can see on the right-hand side, we have written the expressions for x1, x2 going up to xn. And these are quite similar to what we have used previously. But here, the iteration sequence is slightly different. You can see over here that there are two summations, one here, another one here. Why two summations are required? One is for the improved values, the other one is for the old values. So here you can see in the first summation, you have a superscript of k plus 1. In the second one, you have a superscript of k. If you look at the limits of this summation sign, it starts with j equal to 1, goes up to I minus 1. From j equal to 1 to I minus 1 means x1 to xi minus 1. So x1, x2, like that, going up to xi minus 1 have already been calculated from the previous expressions. We are at the moment at xi. We are calculating the value of xi. And whatever comes after that, that is xi plus 1, xi plus 2, going up to xn, they do not have an improved value as yet. And you can see that here in the second summation, it varies from j equal to I plus 1 to n. For them, the old value is to be used. For I equal to I minus 1, new values have already been found out. We can use xj k plus 1. For the others, it will be xj k. So that is how this expression is evaluated. The termination criteria, as I mentioned, remains the same and can be implemented in the same way in the algorithm as well. So the next task would be to write down the algorithm for converting it to the code. And I would ask you to try to write that algorithm yourself. Convergence criteria is also exactly same as before. And you can see that if the system needs to be diagonally dominant, then these two conditions given over here has to be satisfied. That means the diagonal term itself has to be greater than the summation of the all other terms in that particular row. Now let's talk about this example. It's a 2x2 system, very simple system, and it actually clarifies a lot of things in terms of the convergence. Why in certain systems convergence is achieved while in some others convergence is not achieved can be demonstrated through this simple example. Now, this system, it has a coefficient matrix like this. So you have 11, this is 13, this is 11, this is minus 9. We have x1, x2, and on the right hand side you have these 286 and 99. So now you tell me whether this system is diagonally dominant or not. Is it?
No, sir.
It is not diagonally dominant.
No, sir.
Because you see, the diagonal terms are 11 and its magnitude is 9. That is smaller than the other terms. Obviously, here you cannot consider summation because it's a 2x2 system. So obviously, it has to be compared with the other term itself. And this is 13. So greater than 11. This is 11, which is again talking about magnitude greater than 9. So this is not a diagonally dominant system. So what do we expect? Convergence will be achieved or not? It's doubtful.
Shouldn't. Yes, sir.
It may or may not converge. Convergence is doubtful. So I think we can try to solve this problem. We'll use Gauss-Seidel method. Here, the steps are quite clear. I'll express x1 as 286 minus 13 x2, and it is divided by 11. Similarly, x2 would be expressed as 11 x1 minus 99 divided by 9. So these are the two expressions that we have. Initial guesses? Let's say x1 0 is 0. Also x2 0 is 0. Now we can put these values in these two expressions consecutively and try to find out better values, better approximations of x1 and x2. So at the first step, we have, let's say, x1, 1. I have already calculated this value, which is 26. x2, 1. If we put 26 in the previous expression. So first of all, I have put x2 equal to 0. So 286 divided by 11, that would come out to be 26. And then you put 26 in x1. We use the improved value. That is the essence of Gauss-Seidel method. So 11 multiplied by 26 minus 99 divided by 9. So I hope I have done the calculation correctly. And what value I have got here is 20.78. Now this x2 value will then again be taken back to the first expression. We'll put it here in place of x2 and get a new value for x1. So like that we'll continue. But let us try to look at that graphically. So you have a plane over here. This x1 and x2 are the two coordinate axes. And you can see two straight lines over here. What do these two straight lines represent? Anybody?
Two equations, x1, x2.
These are the representations of the two equations. Now those two equations are basically equations of straight line. We have 11 x1 plus 13 x2 is equal to 286. It's an equation of straight line. In fact, you can write it like this: x1 by 26 plus x2 by this, what is it going to be, 22, is equal to 1. So we have an intercept of 26 along the x-axis, x1 axis, and intercept of 22 along the x2 axis. So this is our equation number 1. Similarly, you have 11x1 minus 9x2 is equal to 99. So you have an intercept of 9 along x1 and minus 11 along x2. So this is our equation 2. And what is the solution? The solution is intersection of the two lines. So that point is the exact solution. That gives us x1 and x2. So we started with a value for x1 and x2 0. That means we started from the origin. Starting from this origin, we are trying to approach this value. So at the first step, we have obtained x1 equal to 26. So it goes like this. So you have arrived at that point. Then we have got x2 equal to 20.78. That is 20.78. If we continue, let's say we will get x1, 2. That is the next iteration. This one comes out to be 1.2 442. How we have obtained that? We have put 20.78 in the first expression, calculated x1 again. So x1 is now 1.442. We use x1 equal to 1.442, get a value for x2 again. That comes out to be minus 9.237. You can do your own calculations and check up on this. I have done a rough calculation of this. Hopefully I have done it correctly. And it will continue like this. So I will simply write down the values one after the other. So this is x13, that will be 36.91. x23 is 34.11. x14 is minus 14.312. x24 is minus 28.49. So if you look at these red arrows, these are basically diverging from the solution over here. The solution is at the intersection of the two straight lines. But the way we are going, the way we are approaching by inputting one of the variable values, improved values into the other equation and getting the other unknown value, we are going away from the actual solution. Even if we carry on doing this for 1,000 number of iterations, we will not approach the root, will not approach the solution. So this is a case of divergent solution. So the solution diverges. And that is the sort of situation that arises if the system is diagonally not dominant. Can we make this system diagonally dominant somehow? It is possible. How can we do that? Let's write the expression like this, the two equations like this. 13x2 plus 11x1 is equal to 286. This is the same expression. I think you will agree. The same equation.
Yes.
And this is 9x2 plus 11x1 equal to 19. Now here, if we write the coefficient matrix, this is 13, 11, minus 9, 11. Now, is it diagonally dominant or not? This is definitely diagonally dominant. 13 is greater than 11. This 11 is greater than the magnitude of minus 9, which is 9. So if that is the case, then we can write the two expressions. From the first one, we get x2. And x2 would be 1 by 13. Let me write it like this. 286 minus 11x1, 1 by 13. And x1 would be 99 plus 9x2 into 1 by 11. I'm not going to do the detailed calculation, but here you will see that the solution actually approaches the root. For the first scenario, if we put x1 equal to 0, then we find x21 as equal to, I think, 22. This will be 22. x11 will come out to be 27. So we start from the same point origin, we go up, we find x2 22. From there, x1 27, and like that, it will continuously spiral inward and arrive at the exact solution. So this is the difference that I should say that makes the system converge or diverge. You can see what happens in case of a diagonally dominant system and what happens in case of a system which is not diagonally dominant. There is also another way of making this system diagonally dominant. Can you tell me what is that? Anyone? If we interchange the two equations, that means we make this one, sorry, let's write the system of equation like this. What we have done? We have simply interchanged the position of the two equations. Basically, we have interchanged the rows. Now here also you will see that the system is diagonally dominant. In the first scenario, here we had interchanged the columns. Here we have interchanged the rows and made the system diagonally dominant. And you will also find that for this situation, the system will converge. Any questions? Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
বোঝা গেছে তো? Okay.
Yes, sir.
So next we have this example of a 3x3 system. I'm not going to solve this. This is sort of a home task for you. It's a very simple problem, but calculations need to be carried out. I will also give you the final solution. That means the exact solution is x1 equal to 3, x2 is equal to minus 2.5, and x3 is equal to 7. So that is the solution to this system of equations. You can apply both the Jacobi method and the Gauss-Seidel method to obtain the approximate solution. Here we have a diagonally dominant system. You can see that the diagonal terms are way larger, way bigger than the other terms, which are fractional terms. These are all integer terms. So convergence is assured in case of this system. Carry out just 2 or 3 iteration steps to see how it converges to the solution given over here. At the end of each step also, you need to calculate the error, the approximate error, and see how that error actually diminishes very quickly. Is this problem clear? In the next class, we'll talk about the solution to this problem as well as writing the codes for the algorithm that we have developed in this class. So that's all for today's class. Thank you for your attention.
স্যার
হ্যাঁ বলো।
মানে স্যার এই রিলেটেড ঠিক নয় ওই
ওকে, গো হেড।
রেকর্ডিংটা স্যার বলছিলাম ওই আমাদের এসজিপিএ থেকে ইয়ে কি করে ক্যালকুলেট করে পার্সেন্টেজ